Iran said on Thursday that any U.S. interference in the Strait of Hormuz would trigger a decisive and rapid response, adding that the continued presence of U.S. air assets across the waterway endangered regional security. Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, which coordinates Iran's armed forces operations, said all tanker and commercial vessels must follow routes designated by Tehran for safe passage, adding that deviations or failure to comply with navigation protocols would face an immediate response. The United States and Iran have made positive progress during indirect peace talks in Doha, Qatar, as President Donald Trump claims Iran has agreed to just about everything we need regarding denuclearization. Trump told reporters that the denuclearization of Iran is moving along well and that the two nations are getting along very well despite a series of heavy U.S. airstrikes last week. Due to the death of Iran's former supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, formal negotiations are briefly paused. The next round of high-level meetings will be scheduled immediately following his funeral procession. Bahrain's foreign minister condemned Iran over renewed ballistic missile and drone attacks on its country, speaking ahead of the UN Security Council meeting. Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani said that Bahrain had requested the meeting after Iran once again launched ballistic missiles and armed drones against civilian areas as a breach of commitments under the Memorandum of Understanding. He said that Bahrain had endured hundreds of missile and drone attacks since February 28th, targeting residential neighborhoods and civilian infrastructure. The attacks had killed 3 people and wounded hundreds, including women and children. The minister said Bahrain remained committed to peace, dialogue and stability, but would preserve its right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Iran unveiled the coffin of former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in Tehran on Thursday as the country prepares for days of mass funeral rites. Khamenei's funeral will begin in Tehran on July 4th and conclude with his burial in his hometown Mashhad on July 9th. Funeral events will begin with mass processions planned next week in Qom and Mashhad and ceremonies in Iraq. Iranians gathered on Tehran streets ahead of the funeral. Islamic law requires the deceased to be buried as soon as possible and ideally within 24 hours of death, but exceptions are allowed, for example, in time of war. India will be represented by Governor of Bihar, Lieutenant General Saeed Ata Hasnain, and Minister of State for External Affairs, Pabitra Margarita, for the funeral ceremony of late Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The high-level representation in the ceremony underscores the importance of civilizational ties, including people-to-people connection between the two countries, providing a robust foundation to political and economic engagements. Indian religious leaders joined dignitaries from around the world in paying tribute to Iran's late Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Saeed Ali Khamenei. The high-level delegation highlighted the strong civilizational and people-to-people ties between India and Iran, reinforcing a foundation for deeper political and cultural engagement between the two countries. All right, our correspondent Akshay Dongre is joining us on West Asia Update. Akshay, hi. Get us, what do you make the events further panning out from here? Because on one hand, we have seen Donald Trump asserting that everything is going on well between US and Iran. At the same time, Iran has warned US that Hormuz is not a playground. How do you see the events further pan out from here?
Well, the situation remains sensitive here as far as the attacks are concerned. The kind of repeated statements that are being made at times, many times, inflammatory statements are also being given by the leaders of the parties that are involved in the conflict. But as of now, also we have to give a crucial piece of information that the United Nations Security Council also convened an emergency meeting over the attacks on Bahrain, and the other side, including the UK, US, and the Western camp, has again accused Iran of violating the negotiation process as well as the things that were agreed upon by both the US and Iran as far as the ending of hostilities are concerned. Whereas Iran has defended the action, stating that the attack has only been the US military headquarters that are located in Bahrain. However, for the situation, Preeti, remains quite sensitive, especially given the fact that we are really not exactly out of the conflict, and at this point in time, nothing that Donald Trump says can be taken at face value. We have seen many of the statements by Donald Trump that have not turned out to be true. Many of the claims that they have made have sounded lacking utmost honesty as far as the statements regarding this conflict are concerned, and the lack of trust, mutual trust, is still quite deep. It runs quite deep between the two sides, both Iran and US and Israel. Given the fact that it's only been a few days that the agreement has come into effect, and the shipments of oil and other natural resources have started flowing out of Strait of Hormuz, but that too have been under attack, especially given the fact that when the Singapore vessel tanker had tried to take the Oman corridor, they were also attacked. So we cannot really come out and say that the conflict is totally over, or that the situation is absolutely under control, because the situation does sort of signal that the situation is not totally in control of the countries that are party to the war. In fact, many of the splinter groups are trying to also create problems, especially those who have not agreed to the terms of the agreement that have been made between Iran and US. So it is right now too early to state that the conflict has totally ended, and the 60-day ceasefire period that has come into effect will require rather a lot of diplomacy as well as calmer minds to ensure that the situation doesn't get out of control once again. That can really plunge the global economy to new lows, like the ones we have seen a couple of months back since the conflict started between the two sides. And especially if you talk about the statements that have been given by Donald Trump, yes, obviously he remains the president of the US, but given his own history of many a times making inflated statements, there is a lot of doubts that are being raised as far as the entire process is concerned, and the intentions behind these kind of small attacks and small incidents that have the potential of breaking down the entire peacemaking process to the ground.
All right, Akshay, also the funeral of Iran's late supreme leader will be carried forward, will be carried today, and it will continue till 9th of July. What more can you add? We've told about the representation of India at the funeral. What more can you add?
Well, India is doing its own balancing act. It is a friend of Israel. It is a friend. It has been a friend for several centuries of Iran as well, and especially in the recent months, we have seen that India has been advocating for diplomacy and dialogue between both the parties. In fact, India's persistent position in these kind of conflicts has been of dialogue and diplomacy, and it has been proven right after the agreements were reached by both the US and Iran to end the conflict and begin a sort of denuclearization of Iran, as well as opening of Strait of Hormuz and the rebuilding process. So that is the only way forward, and that is why it is important for India to also maintain presence at such an important event that's taking place in Iran. It is a sentimental issue for Iran, the funeral of their late supreme leader, and we have sent a Minister of State of the External Affairs Ministry along with a serving governor. So that is a high-level delegation that has been sent by India, but the balancing act continues, and India does realize that to ensure that peace remains in the neighborhood, it will also have to act not just as a friendly country, but also as a major power in the region that ensures that the route of dialogue and diplomacy remains open by constantly advocating for it.
All right, Akshay, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for joining in with those updates.